Nobody expected her to say it. Not like that. Not in a packed press room filled with cameras, reporters, and WTA officials sitting quietly in the back, all waiting to catch every word. The Italian Open was coming to a close. The clay courts of Rome had done what they always do, separating the hopefuls from the players who truly belong. And Alex had just made it clear to the entire tennis world which side she was on. At just 20 years old, she sat behind a microphone in a press room that smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, with every reason to keep things safe. Say thank you to the sponsors. Credit the coaching team. Talk about hard work, discipline, and national pride. That's the usual script. The expected script. But Alex didn't follow it. She looked down at her hands for a brief moment, then lifted her gaze and said something that instantly drained the room's sound. Not an uncomfortable silence. Not an awkward one. Something deeper. The kind of quiet that hits when a truth lands so cleanly that everyone needs a second to process it. And that moment, that single press conference in Rome, is what this story's really about. Because what she said didn't just stay in that room. It rattled something inside an institution that has spent decades deciding how its young stars are supposed to behave. Before getting into what happened in that press room, you need to understand who Alex really is. Because if you reduce her to a ranking, a flag, or a feel-good story about a girl from the Philippines breaking through on the world stage, you're missing the bigger picture. Alex grew up in a country that doesn't just support its athletes, it carries them. The Philippines, with over 110 million people, has a deep, almost relentless hunger for someone to represent them on the biggest stages in sport. When Manny Pacquiao fought, life itself seemed to pause. Streets emptied. Cities went still. That's the weight that comes with being a Filipino champion. It's not just support. It's expectation, emotion, identity. And Alex, from a very young age, became that symbol for a new generation. She wasn't a boxer. She was a tennis player, a teenager with a racket and a game that already looked like it belonged on a far bigger stage. A powerful baseline presence, movement that seemed almost unfair for her age, and a competitive instinct that coaches usually spend years trying to teach. Careers trying to teach and rarely succeed. By the time she was 16, people were already speaking about her in the language reserved for generational talents. By 18, she was competing at the highest level. By 20, she had broken into the top 40, with a name that had already appeared in speeches by presidents and acknowledgments from public figures far beyond sport. Brands moved quickly, opportunities followed, and everywhere she went, the Philippine flag followed too, carried by fans who had crossed continents just to stand inside the same arenas as her. That is the world she walks through every day. Now imagine being 20 years old in that reality. You spent your entire life being told you are special, that you represent something larger than yourself, that every match carries meaning not just for you, but for an entire nation watching half asleep at 3 a.m. because of the time difference. That isn't pressure in the usual sense. It's heavier than that, subtler, the kind of weight that doesn't break you all at once. It reshapes you slowly if you let it. Most young players in that position follow the same pattern. They smile, they nod, they give the expected answers. Right things. They absorb the weight because they're grateful, and because they don't yet know how to put it down without feeling like they're letting someone down. Alex did something different, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because this press conference only lands the way it does when you understand what led to it. The Italian Open had been something else for her. Not just a good run, something closer to a statement. She opened her campaign with a win over Magdalena Freck, the world number 45, in a 3-set battle that demanded everything she had. Freck is never an easy out, experienced, steady on clay, the kind of opponent who forces you to earn every point the hard way. And Alex did exactly that. Then came Wang Xinyu, seated 31st in the draw. A player built around flat, aggressive striking. Someone who can rip the racket out of your hands on clay if you're even slightly off balance. Alex wasn't. She handled it in straight sets. Clean, controlled, almost clinical. And, in a way, that performance had more than the scoreline ever could. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was dictating. Then came the match that had Rome buzzing. Elena Rybakina, world number 2, one of the most dangerous servers on tour in the women's game. A player who can end a rally so quickly it feels like you barely got a chance to be part of it. Alex faced in the third round and pushed it to a 6-4, 6-3 scoreline that doesn't fully reflect how competitive the match really was. Rybakina won, yes, but there were stretches where the Foro Italico crowd, the kind that understands tennis at its highest level, was holding its breath because Alex was there, competing, moving, fighting for every point as if the scoreboard hadn't yet been decided. And even in defeat, she showed something rankings don't measure, that she belongs. Her ranking rose to 38 after Rome. She collected nearly 80,000 euros in prize money. She played some of the cleanest clay court tennis of her young career. By every objective measure, it was a breakthrough tournament. And then came the press conference. The questions followed the usual rhythm. How did you feel about your performance? What did you take from the Rybakina match? How are you preparing for Roland Garros? Alex answered them with a calm, careful precision that journalists appreciate. No cliches, no empty lines. She spoke about her improvements on clay, about the tactical adjustments her team had been working on, and her growing confidence on a surface that had historically given her trouble. Then a reporter from a major European outlet raised his hand. The question he asked was the one everyone in the room wanted answered. Alex, you're carrying the hopes of 110 million people. The flags follow you everywhere, the emotion, the expectations of an entire nation. How do you carry all of that? It's the kind of question that's almost unfair because there isn't a clean answer. Say you love the support, and it sounds like a press release line. Say it's difficult, and you risk being framed as ungrateful. Most players handle it with something safe. A smile, a careful sentence. Something warm enough to satisfy, vague enough to avoid consequence. Alex didn't do that. She paused, looked down, then looked up. The obligation, first and foremost, is to myself. It's my journey. I'm only 20, and I'm going to be the one who makes the decisions about my future. The room didn't react loudly. It didn't need to. The silence came instantly, not theatrical, not exaggerated, just heavy. The kind of silence that happens when a sentence lands in a place people aren't used to hearing it spoken out loud, because it didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound offensive. It sounded final sound strategic. They sounded like something she had actually thought about, something she genuinely believed. And then she continued. Yes, of course. I want to give back as much as they give to me, but I play for myself first. Because if I'm not happy, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not playing for the right reasons, then I can't give anything to anyone else. She paused just slightly, then added, everyone talks about the pressure of carrying a nation, but I've learned pressure is not something that's put on you. It's something you accept. And I've decided not to accept it, not in the way people think. The cameras kept rolling. Pens kept moving. Phone stayed steady in recording mode. In the back of the room, WTA officials did something that officials in rooms like that almost never do. They paid closer attention. And that matters more than it sounds. Because the WTA, the governing body of women's tennis, has spent decades building not just a tour, but a product. And part of building that product involves shaping narratives, which players get framed as the next global face of the sport, whose stories are amplified, and which talents quietly exist at the margins despite their results. Over time, they become very good at identifying a certain type of young star. Grateful, eager, willing to be shaped, willing to smile for the cameras and say the right things at the right moments. For a long time, that system worked. Players went along with it because it was framed as professionalism, as maturity, as the safest path forward. The alternative, pushing back, drawing boundaries, refusing the script, was treated as risky, costly, unwise. Alex, without announcing anything, made it feel like the opposite might finally be worth considering. What she said in Rome wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a calculated media strategy. It was simply honesty. But honesty, in a sport that has often blurred the line between vulnerability and weakness, between compliance and professionalism, can land like something far heavier. And the reaction proved it. Within hours, clips from the press conference were everywhere. The hashtag Alex Eala began trending worldwide, not just in the Philippines, but globally. And the responses said everything about how starved people were for this kind of moment. Fans wrote things like, "She's never pretended to be something she's not. That's exactly why we love her." Others said, "Finally, a young athlete who isn't afraid to say I come first." And one quote, repeated again and again, captured the tone of the moment better than anything else. "The WTA wants puppets. Alex is not a puppet, and that's why people are already talking about her like a future champion." Philippine media picked it up immediately. The headlines weren't offensive or alarmed. They were proud. Filipina star refuses to be defined by expectations. That was one of them. And that reaction made sense, because what Alex said wasn't rejection of her country. It was a different kind of loyalty, a more complicated one. The kind that comes from understanding that you can only give what you actually have. That burning yourself out in the name of expectation isn't devotion. It's self-destruction, just dress and praise. But the moment didn't stop at national pride. What made it feel genuinely significant was how the rest of the tennis world responded. Naomi Osaka posted something simple. "Proud of you. This takes courage." Coming from Osaka, who stepped away from the sport at its peak to protect her mental health, who sat in front of cameras and openly spoke about her struggles. That message carried weight. It wasn't just encouragement. It was recognition from someone who understood exactly what it cost to say something like that out loud. Then there was Coco Gauff, who has navigated her own version of expectation and scrutiny from a young age. Her response was more measured, but no less meaningful. A quiet acknowledgement that said, in essence, she understood the moment too,